The Libertarian Party supports the matter of public importance from the Honourable Mark Latham and warmly acknowledges his always valuable contributions in this chamber. This truly is a matter of public importance. Economic policy is paramount. If we get it right, we will have peace and prosperity. If we get it wrong, a gloom and a misery comes over the nation and the state. New South Wales was the mother colony and is the economic powerhouse of the nation. We need this parliament to become an engine room of sound economic policy. The good news is that for most of our history, this state and nation has had good economic settings. We have been a fundamentally capitalist society until recently. I think it's fair today to describe New South Wales and Australia as democratic socialist societies. The Centre for Independent Studies had a paper recently in which they tried to calculate the total tax take from all levels of government, and they concluded it could be higher than 50%. I'd call a society democratic socialist if it was higher than 25%. The massive advantage we do have, however, is our stupendous economic achievements of the past. We have a great foundation, so with sound economic leadership we can get back on track. In 1770, a British ship, the Endeavour, sailed up the east coast of this continent. James Cook was its navigator, but after he saw New South Wales once, Cook showed little further interest. But also on board was Joseph Banks, who, when he returned to London, could not stop raving about the potential of New South Wales, which he described as larger than Europe. Banks was one of the British Empire's most powerful statesmen, and he became the unofficial Minister for New South Wales. He lobbied the King, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet and everyone else for a British settlement until they finally agreed in 1786. For the remaining 34 years of Banks's life, he ran New South Wales from his armchair in London. Banks chose our governors and set policy, and he got us off to a great start. In the 19th century, Australia was in many ways an anarcho-capitalist utopia. There were some rules about not being able to live outside a narrow zone around Sydney, but by the 1820s, free settlers were flooding in and ignoring those rules. Those squatters built the towns of regional Australia with barely a government official to be seen. Everything was soaring upwards. In 1906, this state adopted a logo that we see in the crest above you, Madam Acting President, and I won't try the Latin, but it translates as "newly risen, how brightly you shine." Accurate. But then Australia had a poor decade in the 1920s. The dominant Prime Minister of the day was Stanley Melbourne Bruce. And for those of you that haven't heard of our seventh longest serving Prime Minister, think of a cross between Gough Whitlam and Malcolm Turnbull.
Oh, can't be that bad.
It was. Bruce was upper class and grandiose. He was meant to be a conservative, but he dreamed up all these big state nation building projects. He was going to grow Australia's then population of around 6 million to 50 million by the 1940s. But all his big plans flopped and he left the nation in serious public and private debt. At the time, the United States was booming under the most libertarian president in history, Calvin Coolidge. It was the roaring 20s and taxes were low and getting lower, and American capitalist ingenuity invented the world of modern appliances and entertainment. In 1929, Australians voted Bruce out and elected a Labor government for the first time in a decade and a half. 3 days later, Wall Street crashed and inexperienced democratic socialists were running Australia. We were already in a perilous economic situation, and so Australia was the first nation in the world to meet the Great Depression. Things were especially dire in Australia. It's forgotten now, but during those dark days there were regular street brawls on the streets of Sydney between proto-fascist and communist groups. The federal Labor government split three ways, and in the middle of the chaos, the Labor Treasurer, Joe Lyons, defected to the opposition, and then a few months later won the biggest two-party preferred election win in Australian history. Under Joe Lyons' frugal fiscal leadership, Australia bounced out of the Great Depression quickly. Joe Lyons was a smashing success because he oversaw free market pro-capitalist reforms. Debt was paid down, inflation tamed, spending cut, taxes cut, all the simple stuff that works every single time. From 1932 until the end of that decade, Australian GDP growth was typically 5%, with only 1 year in that period recording negative growth. In 1932, the unemployment rate in America was 25%, while Australia was the worst in the Western world at 32%. But just 4 years later, Australia's unemployment rate dropped from 32% to 9%, but America's unemployment rate had only dropped from 25% to 20% and remained stubbornly high. Joe Lyons went on to easily win 2 more elections and then sadly died in office in 1939. His prudent economic management rescued Australia, and he was lauded around the world for his success. When Joe Lyons died, the New York Times wrote, "Joseph Aloysius Lyons, the schoolteacher who beat the Depression in Australia, had a political career unparalleled in his native Australia. He was regarded by his countrymen as the founder of modern Australia. He was honest Joe throughout Australia. In 1931, he broke with the Labor government. Australia in those days was at the crossroads, and within Mr Lyons' party there was a strong section favouring inflation. He was opposed to inflation, foreseeing where it would end, relinquished his office and embarked on a crusade that swept the Commonwealth. Curtin and Chifley were radical and declared democratic socialists. When Chifley launched his bank nationalisation crusade, it delivered 23 years of Liberal Party government. Menzies' critics at the time derided him as being too much in favour of laissez-faire, and so Australia enjoyed the long boom in the 1950s and the 60s. Across the 20th century, the US stock market, the Dow Jones, was the second best performing stock market in the world. The best was the Australian stock market. And 50% of listed companies were New South Wales based, so New South Wales does have a lot to be proud of. It wasn't the result of luck, it was the result of good economic policy. Now, we had a bad patch in the 1970s with Whitlamism and then Fraser failing to reverse it. The luckiest Prime Minister in history is Bob Hawke. In the 1983 federal election campaign, opposition leader Hawke did not campaign on tough economic reforms, but he won. And his great stroke of luck was that 4 years earlier, the saintly Margaret Thatcher demonstrated to the world and Hawke that free market reforms work. So Hawke just jumped on the Thatcherite bandwagon, but rather than doing it via confrontation, like Thatcher had to, Hawke did it by talking about accords and economic summits. The outcome was the same. What better salesman for capitalism than a beloved trade union boss? Treasurer Keating was the driver of those reforms, but he lost his nerve after the recession of 1990 and wasted his prime ministership talking about things like the flag, Asia, Mabo and a republic. John Howard's first 2 terms continued the tradition of sound economic management, but then 9/11 happened and Howard threw out the window fiscal restraint as he shamefully sent us to regime change wars and embedded middle-class welfare. Rudd won the 2007 federal election the moment he said, "I will not try and compete with John Howard's campaign cash splurges." Then we had the subprime crisis and Rudd racked up the debt. Then we had the COVID hysteria and now we waste endless billions on phony baloney global warming projects. So, since 9/11, we have barely had a positive economic reform in this state or nation. The only sound leader this nation has had this century is former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman, who governed prudently like Lyons and Menzies, Hawke and Howard in his first half at least. We haven't had any good economic reform, but we have had higher and wider taxes, ballooning debt everywhere, ever tighter regulations in every single industry. Businesses are shying away from investing in New South Wales, as the Treasurer just told us. So yes, Mark Latham is correct. We are on a bad trajectory. We have been in a per capita recession for over 2 years. The pie is growing at a slower pace than our population. Our political class is covering up the recession by excessive immigration levels. But the cover-up cannot last forever. A recession is coming. We cannot batter an economy for so long and avoid a recession. Australia desperately needs the economic dry faction of the Liberal Party to make an urgent comeback and the Libertarian Party to continue to shape the economic agenda by making the purest case for Harvey Milei-style economic reforms, which are making Argentina boom. New South Wales is the engine room of Australia. This Parliament can demonstrate to the rest of the nation that sound economic policies work. The Premier and the Treasurer should launch a deregulatory crusade. Every day or two in my office, I have representatives of one industry after another, and they all have horror stories of state government red tape that they know is meaningless at best and counterproductive at worst. It ties up their time, it depletes their commercial creativity. What I fear the most, Madam Acting President, is that when a recession does hit, that we do not turn to sound economic reforms, but voters get tricked into voting for an authoritarian agenda from either the left or the right. Thank you.